Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with book coaches, editors, and besties as we discuss books, but not just as readers. We discuss them as writers to draw inspiration from great books, lots of laughs, and it is very evident in the fact that we can't even start this episode, y'all, without cutting up. So welcome back to our podcast, and we are in the first episode of the year, and our pick for this month is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, which is Rachel's jam. But before we get into today's episode, which is our overview, Rachel, what do you have going on over there at Story Cypher?
Yes, ma'am. Well, first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. First episode of the new year. So I wanted to just, because, we just came off the holidays, first episode of the new year. And so I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, what we got up to reading over the last couple of weeks. We both were supposed to be on a break, and we kind of were on a break, but really we were both just still working. But it was a good opportunity to get some good reading in. And so I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what we were reading over the holidays. So for me, I cleared a couple of good books. So number one is I found actually a book that for me is actually a comp for my novella, which is called The Foxwife by, now I'm not 100%, I might not get this pronunciation correct, but Youngse Chu is my guess. But she wrote, this came out in February of 2024. It is part historical fiction, part magical realism, and y'all, there's a detective. I mean, it takes place in Manchuria in 1908, and they go across China, they go into Japan, and so you're seeing these places in 1908, but there's spirits, there's foxes, there's ghosts, it's all of the things that I love in a story, and there's a detective who's trying to find out what happened to, a girl who turned up on a doorstep, and so it's like, for me, it's the most perfect. It's probably my favorite book that I read in 2025. So yeah, it's really, really good. I kind of wanted to pick it for the podcast, but we kind of already slated everything, and it's a little bit longer. And so if I was going to put it on the list, I was like, I'll put it for further into the future, because it's 400 pages. It's pretty decent sized.
We've done longer.
So it's true. Speaking of Mistborn. So anyway, I'm reading that. I'm finishing up Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley, which is a brilliant piece of fiction, way more brutal than I was expecting. I was like, fun, detective. And it is it's 1940, it's late 1940s, so 1948, 1949, hard-boiled. Walter Mosley has a tremendous understanding of noir as a genre, but he's writing the story from, it's a hard-boiled detective, which is something that we see in the 40s and 50s, but our hard-boiled detective is a black man, and so the kind of experience, right, we get the hard-boiled detective experience, but through the lens of taking all of those tropes and what do those tropes look like when your protagonist is a black man, and it looks of course radically different in a lot of ways. And so it's really I was expecting a more of a mystery, and I'm like, a detective. It is, oh man, it is brutal. So I've been finished up that one, and then there was one other. I started the next book in the Hierarchy series, so that just came out this year by James Islington. It's the second, so The Will of the Many was the first book, and this one is The Strength of the Few. And then lastly, I read Lucy Score's Story of My Life as well. So those were kind of my holiday reads. What about you, Dana? What you reading over there? What's on your list of books to read?
Girl, first of all, my reading list was not like yours. I was maybe I've been chillaxing a little too much. So I started the Lucy Score book, The Story of Our Life. I have not finished that. I'm reading that right now. So I'm just it's, I'm reading it.
Yeah.
I read Fourth Wing. And girl, I'm gonna call this woman Rebecca. Yaros. I was about to call
Which
her
is good because that's the right thing to call her, Rebecca Yaros.
I don't know why I want to keep calling her Jessica. So I read that, which that book I've been wanting to read, and I had it on my list of romantasy books that always get recommended, and that was one of them. And so that is actually the book that was on the list when I read the K.F. Bream books. Mm-hmm. And so the next one, when I'm back in that rotation, will be the Court of Thorns and Roses is next in that list of books. It's going to be a minute because I have other stuff going on, but that's the next one sort of in that rotation that are always recommended. So it was actually really, I enjoyed it and end up swapping out our last book club read with it.
Oh, nice.
Because it just, because I knew because we needed like either a fantasy or a PNR book. Mm-hmm. And so it was a great swap out. And so I did that. I read a lot of nonfiction, not as much fiction, which is weird for me. I can't even remember the titles. This lets you know how much I enjoyed it. I read some y'all, I'm really not that bad. I read some like the YouTube formula. I read for my project with the YouTube. So I did a couple of other YouTube books, which were really good and helpful. I felt like I was like, oh my God, my brain feels like I'm back in school. Like you're talking about all this stuff that I'm like, I'm not as tech like as I think I am sometimes. I'm really not. So I read those.
Would you like to join the old lady club over here?
No,
would you like
I don't
to come to the dark side? Are you interested in getting yourself a typewriter?
First of all, wait a minute. You know I learned to type on a typewriter, okay?
Come full circle. Come to the dark side, Dana. Come full circle and get a typewriter.
I'm not going to be old lady Rachel, okay? And then, and so no, and then, girl, listen, if we need me to be all the way over to the other side to balance out your old lady tendencies. And so, and then I was starting to prepare myself for the books that I'm studying this first coming quarter. So I've just been like going through a lot of the client reads and starting to read some of them to kind of reacclimate myself and decide what books that I want to have on my TBR. And this is kind of a little bit of a, I need to send it to you, but a little bit of an aside, a little bit of a squirrel moment. So I stumbled onto this challenge, this reading challenge that is supposed to counteract brain rot. And from scrolling, how did I end up here? Who knows? But it's like a very interesting reading challenge in looking towards finding books that sort of challenge your thinking, keeping a sort of keeping your analytical part of what did you didn't writing it physically again versus doing it digitally. I'm gonna send it to you and see what you think. I thought it was very interesting, even though I was like my whole list would still be romance books. I think I a little bit missed. But yeah, so so I feel like I thought I didn't do a lot of reading, but I did. And so, yeah, I got more on my plate, a lot of reading this coming up quarter. And so with that said, let's get ready to, which was not reading, but just rounding out our reading list for 2026. And so that was another thing that we've kind of been doing of balancing out and seeing what we want over the next year.
Man, I tore through a few books over the holidays trying to find my last picks for 2026, which was also just honestly kind of a mess. I went through multiple books and I was like, this will never do. This isn't even, no. And then I'd listen to another book and I'd be like, no. And so it's really a hot mess. Only to come to one that I'm like, I read this years ago and it was great.
Oh, that's good. I kept thinking about that book we stumbled upon that we didn't. I was like, do I need to pick that book? And I was like, I think that one is too far out there. The one that I told you about. Was.
It looked pretty wild. I Googled it after, and I was like, this looks like a wild ride.
It was. So I was like, you know what? Because she's already was so clutching your pearls on
Boy, I barely made it through friggin' Twisted Love. I was like, oh my god! They did what? You're gonna have to ease me into that stuff, man.
I was like, let me not pick that.
Thank you. Maybe 2027, Rachel, will
Maybe.
be able to handle it. I'm not making any promises because,
oh no,
oh boy.
because that one is a book. It's a book of bears. So with that said, so yeah, like getting ready and reading, and I'll finish up that Lucy score. And honestly, we'll be moving into, at the time of us recording this, moving into my reading list for 2026. So, which should be very interesting, as I have a book club, I have our reading list, and then I have my reading list.
Oof. A lot of reading coming up. That's probably why for the holidays you were like, what if I slowed down for just a half a second before I have to speed up?
No, I let myself enjoy the books that I read really slow, which was like, oh.
That's got to be nice, because you got to move fast throughout the year. So being able to like actually take in a book and be like, ooh, and just enjoy it, that's something special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when I'm traveling, because it's harder, because you do start, stop. It's not like the same like when I'm at home, because I can do it while I'm crafting and stuff like that. So I can get long like periods of time where I can just do it. So yeah, definitely. So with that said, y'all, we are about to get into our first pick for 2026, which is a Rachel pick.
We always go hard to start off the year. It's just what we do now. Last year it was Next House. This year it's Mistborn. So buckle up, everybody.
Next time I need to pick the January pick. Mm-hmm.
But
this
if I pick the January pick, it also means that I get the October pick, which is like I want the Halloween pick. I want the spooky season pick.
We're gonna let me one time. I don't even know what I would pick, so I'm just saying this to be a pain. So we're doing Mistborn, which is Rachel's pick and also Rachel's jam. This is one of the books and we'll talk about that more in this overview. But before we get into that, Rachel, go ahead and hit us with the summary before we dive in to our overview of Mistborn.
You got it. So, Vin is a Ska working on a thieving crew, just trying to survive. Just like every Ska, under the heavy hand of the Lord Ruler, God and Emperor over Luthadel. But when she gets recruited by Kelsier for a job, she discovers that her luck is way more than just luck. And Kelsier isn't just trying to rob the Lord Ruler, he's trying to kill him. This high-stakes job could change everything for Vin and Ska everywhere. If Kelsier and his crew of specialists can overcome Steel Inquisitors, noble spies, and teach Vin how to be a Mistborn and how to wear a dress.
That dress.
Ta-da!
And scene. So, Rachel, as we go into this discussion, what are some of the things that you want us to sort of highlight as we go into the overview of Mistborn? I'm going to add this caveat, and I believe we pretty much did it in all the episodes, which is we cannot obviously cover everything or even a good chunk of what is in this book. So we did our absolute best to sort of pull out the things that sort of rose to the top and that could be applicable across any book that you're writing, like to take into some considerations, but that we really find that he does well in this story. And so that's the caveat. But with that said, what are the things that you'd like for us to sort of take a stab at in this overview?
Yeah, so, one of the things, just to kind of like add on to that caveat as well, is we do talk a little bit about the magic system. In the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about hard and soft magic, particularly because how the plot functions to help unveil the magic system, and how the magic system, you sort of like take the time to let it trickle down and look at the impacts of, if this is how the world works, what does that mean? So we talk about it some, but not in the way that, like, we don't have a single in-depth discussion about the magic system, more about how the magic system functions as a part of the plot. and how the plot is sort of used to unveil the magic system. So we're saying that here because if we go through all 3 episodes and you're like, hey, you didn't talk about the magic system, and it's like, nope, there literally wasn't enough time because of how much there was to talk about with the plot and characters and internal arc and all. There was so much to talk about. This is like, they're just like, we didn't even find a spot for it. So that's kind of adding on to your caveat of like, this is one of those topics that we really didn't get to cover that much. But I will say that this is, if you are writing science fiction, fantasy, or historical fiction, where you have to do a lot of world building, where you have to catch your reader up on a lot of, orient them to a world that they're not already familiar with. This is a masterclass in how to handle that, how to do it well, how to incorporate it with the plot, how to pace the world building that you do, and the tools that you can use to do it. Because sometimes we opt for an info dump simply because we don't think, oh my gosh, I could just as easily sort of show this world building aspect and never have to explain it because the audience witnesses it in action. And so this is one that I use to teach world building, and how to sort of use the plot to unveil the world building, but also how to sort of pace out that information at a scene to scene level, and how we sort of pair action in the story, and then we get a little bit of explanation, and then action and explanation. So this book is really, really fantastic for that. And it's also the book I use to teach the 4-act structure, because it is just an absolute masterclass in plotting. So that's one of those sort of like overarching like introductory remarks that I could say about this is masterclass in plotting. I use it to teach the 4-act structure. I use it with clients a lot who are, working on these larger scale plots that tend to be sort of action oriented stories. But it's also really, really good for world building at that scene to scene level. I also want to talk a little bit about this idea that, it's a fantasy heist, but it's also a rebellion plot, and the way that those two play together to actually create something quite innovative. And we also want to talk about the fact that it's a first book in a trilogy, because that's a huge point. And also, if you are someone who is writing a first book in a trilogy, like, your eyes and ears should like perk up and like, oh, this is for me, because this is a great example of a first book in a trilogy. So what are some of the things that you want to just kind of cover in the overview to sort of like prime everybody for the conversation we'll have over the next 3 weeks?
I think you're going to cover a lot of it, and I'm just going to sort of piggyback on it. The only thing that I had still on my list is the fact that we will discuss, and we'll bring it up again, just the fact that we really are locking in on the journey of Ben's journey, which is our protagonist here, and the fact that you have an ensemble cast. And we really kind of had a really in-depth discussion when it comes to in the characters, but we also see how that informed the plot and how Brandon Sanderson uses this cast to not just move the story forward, but also to assist and aid in Vin's sort of transformation throughout the story. So that was the other thing that I had, other than us sort of covering those elements that you talked about. So let's go ahead and maybe we can just kind of come back to the magic system and world building towards the end, so that we can talk a little bit like into the meatier things first, starting off with the 4-act structure. We both love teaching the 4-act structure. I do find that it's so interesting to have the fact that the structure is the same, but where you sort of latch onto and the focus when you're talking about whether it's a mystery or an action story versus like romance, where it's pretty more a little bit more regimented, is interesting. But it's still, those same core areas are really a great place to sort of anchor your story and knowing where you're going to go even before you sort of get into the nitty gritties of plotting. And so I'd love to hear how you sort of anchor us when it comes to Mistborn and when you're working with your clients, looking through the lens of that 4-act structure.
Yeah, so the way that I really like to sort of approach it, there's like a couple of specific things. So obviously, many of my clients come to me, they've already read it, so we can start having a discussion of it. If they haven't, I have them read it sort of in between our sessions, and I also, so that we can come back together and discuss the book. But really, there's a couple of things that it has that it's so effective. So first is the pacing of the story, the clear escalation of stakes as you move from one act to the next and this also plays into the implementation of a core story thread, right? So this is something that we'll talk about a lot in the plot episode, but this is a story that has a very clear central plot that guides everything. And the reason that matters is because then you can track through the 4-act structure how this plot is developing. And so even as we pick up some subplots along the way and we pick up these additional story threads, we're watching those threads escalate the stakes on or complicate that central story, thread, right? Which is about the overthrow of the Lord Ruler. That's the question that gets raised with the inciting incident, and it's the question that gets answered with our climax. And so that's really useful to kind of anchor your discussion of the 4-act structure, because then you can actually track, like, what are we following over the course of the 4-act structure? And that even, trickles down to the scene level then, because it means that every scene is contributing to that core plot. So we always feel like we're making progress, and you're able to actually track that across the 4-act structure. And so just when you're looking at this story, and I get a chance to talk about it a little bit again in takeaways, but you're looking at what the individual acts feel like. Because you can feel the clear distinction when we're in Act 1 and what Act 2 feels like versus Act 3 and Act 4, and how we maintain pace. And the way that central story thread allows us to maintain pace while we're escalating the stakes as we go through the story. And what's great is, when you're looking at when you're looking at a story with life and death stakes, it can be, you can kind of fall into one of two potential pitfalls, where either you start and you're like, okay, it's got to be super low stakes at the beginning because I know I have to escalate them. And I don't want to, if I start too high, I know I have to go up from there. And so we try to it's very and nobody gets hurt, and it's all very it's kind of like we're bumping around, biding our time till we get to the second act when we can start to ratchet, up the stakes a little bit. Or we start with a whole lot of bam, bang, boom, boom, explosions, crazy death and limbs and blah. And then we have nowhere to go because we're like, uh-oh.
You did all the things.
We did it all within the first act, and now it's all downhill from here. And this is such a great example of a story with very clear life and death stakes, and seeing how those still manage to escalate over the story. We have deaths in the first act of the story. How he handles those deaths and how he handles the threat to life in the first act is setting us up for the kind of story we're going to experience, and making promises to us that he delivers on again and again and again throughout the story in escalating fashion across the act. And it's such a great example of, again, especially because a lot of my fantasy writers, historical fiction as well for that matter, are kind of in the action genre, where they're dealing with stories with life and death stakes. This one is such an amazing example of how to set the reader up for the kinds of conflicts that they're going to see and the kind of story that this is, and then continue to deliver on those in an escalating way. So just from a 4-act structure and overarching plotting perspective, this book is a work of art.
Well, one of the things too that first of all, a lot of my stories are not life or death, right? Like when I'm doing romantic suspense, it's usually something there, but it's not, it kind of escalates to that point. And so one of the things that I truly appreciate is when you see the story in that first act and it tips off to the level of the potential harm that could be there. Here it is life or death, or the stakes. And we see it on both of those primary levels, of the individual level with Vin, when she's interacting with her original crew, and also with when it comes to the world and what to expect and what's going on when it comes to the sky and the noble. And you see that immediately. And I don't have a word for this, and I really should, because I think it's so helpful, because it really is a tip off to the reader of where this thing is going.
Yep.
And when you're able to do that soon, it helps to alleviate a lot of shock later, especially when you find that your protagonist is in the middle of a situation where, oh, wait a minute, this is getting rough. And I love the fact that it's here, but it also gives us an opportunity to say, like, here is the ground level. And if you're already like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, don't do that. If you're already talking and the author is doing it right, you know it's going to escalate from there. So to be able to pull back and look at, how it's sort of leveling up with each one of those acts, and how the sort of that core promise of what's coming is just the ground level, then it really is helpful for you to see whether you've done a great job of that across the story. Right. So I love that. And it's helpful for you to begin to troubleshoot.
Yeah.
If you are a person that has issues with Act 2 and Act 3, because usually that's part of that issue.
Yeah.
I think this also bleeds really well into the discussion of the heist. And in my notes, I put like what you call Brando style, like the fact that this is a heist and it's used, or that it has a heist setup, and it's used to not just give us an indicator of what that external plot is, but it's also used in how he utilizes his supporting cast and how he helps to sort of integrate Vin into this team that was already somewhat, if you will, functioning, and sort of incorporating her, and for her to get the support that she needs to change over the course of the story.
Yeah. So the way that I think about this story, now Brandon Sanderson himself calls it a fantasy heist. I am not going to listen. Brandon could tell me that blue is green, and I'd be like, yeah, he's right.
I would say, is it teal? Is it teal, Brandon? Is it?
Dana has fewer fears about her heroes than I do, and I'm like, okay, Brandon, it's green. Whatever you say.
Yeah, sure.
The way that I think about this is sort of a heist-flavored rebellion plot. And I think about it this way because he does use the heist setup as a way to frame the story. But the core of the story promise being made is we're going to overthrow the Lord Ruler. And so our inciting incident is Kelsier recruits Vin for a job to overthrow the Lord Ruler. So the question that gets raised is, will they succeed in overthrowing the Lord Ruler? And the answer to that at the climax is whether or not they succeed. But this is where I think the brilliance is of it. Is like that core plot is really like a rebellion plot at its core. It's like classic rebellion, overthrow the dictator, right? But what he does then is he flavors it with the stuff that he loves and that is awesome about heists. And so what that means is we have, again, a heist-flavored rebellion plot where we're overthrowing the Lord Ruler, but we're doing it using the framing and some of the sort of, you might say, like tropes of a heist story where, we got to get a crew together, and that crew has specialists, and each specialist has to perform a very specific role to implement this overthrow effectively. And then they each have to kind of, each of their parts sort of will have problems that they have to sort of troubleshoot and fix. And so it becomes, and that's really where the innovation is. It's like, this is a rebellion story of overthrowing the Lord Ruler, but then it has all of the cool stuff of a heist that gives it its unique flavor and its unique, on top of the fact that he created a very original world with, he really, I feel like, popularized the hard magic system, where he was like, this has hard and fast rules that the reader knows, that I know, that the characters mostly know on account of it's a trilogy, so they learn a bunch of stuff, but right? Where he really puts those constraints on himself and on the world. And so I say that because all of these things are what makes the story innovative. But from a plot perspective, from just a simple, pure plot perspective, the way that he took this classic story type and then flavored it with elements of another classic story type is a really great way, I think, to think about how to take classic story structures that we know and love and add your own spin to it. And that's really what I think makes the plot, like, enables him to say it's a fantasy heist, and no one is disappointed when they read this book. I showed up and I was like, fantasy heist? Hell yeah. And then I read it, and it's not like I was like, hey, I didn't get a heist. That's not how that feels. And that's because of how clear that central promise is and the way that then he delivers on those added tropes and added flavorings of the heist story. And so I think it's a great way to think about how you add your own flavor to a certain type of story.
Mm-hmm. It's like giving them what the emotional feel that they want in an unexpected way. So it's like merging those things together, and it sort of morphs into something that looks very much like him while still being able to take use of those tropes that people are accustomed to. Mm-hmm. And it gives you like a framework in your mind of what you're expecting. Yeah. Because even as you're saying, I was like, oh, that's like why I really like it. Because, I love Fast and Furious. It makes me think of, just that sort of feel. And so I think, so those sort of things help us to sort of get acclimated to what we're kind of coming into. But then as we have our discussion over the next couple of episodes, you're going to see a lot of us having the discussion around the fact that this is an individual book. Mm-hmm. And even though it is a book one in a trilogy, and sort of having an understanding of the way that best practices for how that should operate. Yeah. And so starting off with the fact that this is an individual book and you want it to be that way. Yeah. But we also see that he is setting us up big time. Mm-hmm. As far as Vin and her journey, what's going on in this world and what's coming up. And so what are some of those like big takeaways? Because I know we don't go into everything, and we're not doing a deep dive, but when it comes to understanding that balance and ensuring that, especially if you're someone that this is your first sort of foray, and when it comes to your first book, that you want to make sure that you are telling the promise, delivering on the promise, and then you're not leaving open loops so that you are sort of breaking that trust before you really get them into the rest of your story, because I think that's the thing that we don't want.
Yeah. And one of my favorite things that you say, and this is going to be a paraphrase and it might be a bit of a botched paraphrase, but is that the best way to sell your second book is this book, right?
That's right.
And that's the rules that we play by when it comes to a trilogy, right? And so to your point, this, if you blow your audience out of the water with this one, then that's going to be the biggest or best guarantee that they're going to go to the second book. Mm-hmm. Rather than trying to bait and switch them, where you're like, haha, you've read all of this book, but you have to read the next one, right? We're not trying to manipulate our reader into picking up the second book or trick them into picking up the second book. Write a good book, and they'll pick up the second book. And so that first book in the trilogy is, just like you said, about establishing trust. So that, again, if they are like, wow, they delivered on this story, they are going to be compelled to the second one. And really, your core plot is what helps you to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Where you understand what the story promise is for that story, and you deliver on that promise. And that's how you really ensure that you have closed the loop on this book. But then again, the answer to that story question raises more questions that the reader wants to see and makes them want to continue. And so you get the best of both, right? Where there's these unanswered questions that we want answers to, but we don't feel like we were treated unfairly, where you told us with the inciting incident, this is the question I'm going to answer by the end of the book, and then didn't answer that question and tried to get us into the second book to get that answer. And so that's really, this book is a great example of that, because you have a clear, like, it could be a standalone. If you only read this book, it is a complete whole. We have a full external arc and we have a full internal arc. And so if you sort of stopped after Mistborn, you have a complete story in your mind. You're like, right? You got kind of a whole thing. It's better if you read the next two, but but it can stand on its own. And that's really what you're looking for in that first book in a trilogy. And again, that's why your core plot is so important, because it helps you establish what is the question that I'm promising I'm going to answer in this book, and then answering that question so that you know that you've delivered on what is, sort of essentially a standalone, as your first book in the trilogy. And then you can build in your second and third book. And we talk about, a trilogy. In a trilogy, your first book is basically Act 1, and your second book is Act 2, and your third book is Act 3. But you still need to, because it's not Act 1 of a single book, but it is Act 1 of a series, then they need to all kind of they open and close, so that we have clear, again, we've opened loops and then we've closed them, and then we escalate and we open loops and then we close them.
And it's not like we go into this in depth, but I would say, like, especially if you're looking at this for that reason, really beginning to ask yourself, like, what part does this serve when it comes to the book one, and what part does this serve when it comes to the trilogy, and making that sort of just a natural rhythm so that you can begin to see how those threads sort of add up, because it does, but it's like you're dancing. Yeah. You've got two different people doing the same dance. And so I think it's important. The other thing too, that I think that it's helpful to do is because it helps you to get an understanding and a perspective of where you want your protagonist to go. And we do talk about this in the character, because Ben's gonna have a different type of journey when we get to the end of book 3, but that doesn't mean that you want to wait to serve it. Like I always tell my clients, like, don't save all your good stuff to the end. Yeah. You should be giving me good stuff, trusting that you got more good stuff to come, right? And so we still need to be totally committed and invested in her journey in this book, so that we want to read the next book. Yeah. And so that's something else that is it's important. And it's whether you're doing a standalone or a trilogy or even a series. But here it's so important because she's the perspective that we are experiencing throughout this story and also throughout this trilogy. And so it's so helpful. And this leads us to kind of considering, if you will, the ensemble cast. This has an amazing ensemble cast, but it is a big cast, and you really can see how it could have been even more, but it's a large cast. And so what are some of the things that I know what we talk about here, but is there some things, like as a rule of thumb, like when you're working with clients, because ensemble casts are not common in my world, right? It is if you're talking about across a series, but here what we see that is important is the fact that we have them all up front, and some are evolving and many of them are staying the same, but we are locked into why they're here, what they represent, what causes them to be a part of this crew, and willing to be a part of this life or death scenario in this story. And we've got to buy into not just Kelsier and his vision for this crew, but each of those characters in order to continue in the story.
Yeah, so when you're dealing with an ensemble cast, because I would say those are fairly common in fantasy, where you have, pretty
they are
casts. Yeah. There's a couple things I think to take into consideration. Number one, truthfully, my experience with clients is a lot of times they have to kind of discover which characters they actually need by writing. So a lot of times I will find they'll have generally an idea of the different characters, and then they'll write and they'll find that, like, oh, this character actually didn't end up playing a role at all, or actually can get, kind of integrated into another. And a lot of times I think it takes that just writing it and seeing things on the page to get a feel for your characters and their relative positionings when you're dealing with an ensemble in particular. But the other, so that's just one thing I think to know. If you're like, oh yeah, I have a pretty big cast, know that the writing will probably tell you more about how much those particular cast members show up and how important they are, and whether, maybe they need to come up in book 2, or if they're actually not a full secondary character, but actually, tertiary or whatever comes after tertiary. So those are just things to know. And this, again, I saw this with my historical fiction client in particular, who, is dealing with historical figures and having to kind of choose which major historical figures are going to feature the most in the story, and which maybe will be sort of more on the periphery. And because we can't pile them all in there, because it's like just too many people and too much stuff going on. But then likewise, when you're dealing with a big cast like that, you also want to pace out our meeting them, because we need to get acclimated to like a few people at a time, right? So we meet Kelsier, and then we meet Vin, and we meet like a couple of characters just on stage who many of them won't show up a whole lot in those first couple of chapters. So then we meet Doxson. We're like, okay, we've Kelsier and Doxson. We kind of understand who they are. We see them in a scene together, and we're like, okay, check. And then we meet Breeze and Ham. And so, but you'll notice how the way that we meet characters is spread over the course of many, many chapters, and we kind of like trickle them in, and then it's like, oh yeah, also this weird guy is Spook. And then like, we get characters one or two at a time, so that it's not, and then it's right, like, it's like, Kelsier's brother Marsh shows up, and we're like, oh, who's this guy? He looks really mean, and so it's giving us it. But what that means is before we meet a new character, we've had a little bit of time with the characters beforehand, right? So it gives us the opportunity to kind of anchor ourselves in like, okay, this one is Breeze, this one is Ham, and we spend a little time with them, and then we're like, okay, and that one is Marsh, but he doesn't show up much, but I know that he's Kelsier's brother, and he looks mean. Got it. And then and it allows you to, the more times you see a character on stage, the more you're able to associate the character with the name and just sort of make a connection and get an understanding for who they are. And then we add in another character, and then we add it, and we do it sort of in that kind of layering process, so that by the time we have everybody and, we're in a meeting with all the characters are there, we know who they are, we know their personalities. We're not like, oh crap, which one is Breeze again? Oh wait, no, I don't remember who that is. Because we've spent enough time with them, and it's sort of, we've been eased into this cast, and that really helps you to keep, to manage that cast and manage the reader's experience of the cast, right? Because we want them to get to know our characters and be excited to spend time with them, and not just be totally like overwhelmed and awash with names, and then constantly being like, wait, no, who is that? Wait, no, hang on, that, and they're like flipping back and forth and constantly sort of like in a frenzy trying to keep up with your characters.
Yeah, and I think this is where the fact that he did use the heist sort of structure is so helpful, because it's not just about a name, and the fact that he layers that, right? It's a name, it's a role, it's a skill set, right? Yeah. And then later it even builds on it, because we start associating the relationship that character has to Vin. So you just get deeper and deeper, and so they become very distinct. And I think that's the thing. So to have a cast that's this size and is still very distinct is extremely helpful. And I think, again, like, it's done really well. And we do see that. There is a couple of things that I like understanding, like here, all of what kind of what we're just talking about here, we begin to think about, like, what do they represent? What do they add? And like, what was each of their individual experiences when it comes to being ska? What do they have as their thoughts as far as the rebellion, and even their connections to Kelsier, that sort of brings forth their loyalty to him in this mission. And so it's sort of like the way that I always am doing, like when I'm working with clients and they're building a series, or in our, like a lot of, whether it's found family or blood family, is really starting to look at like, how do they balance each other? What do they bring to the table that other characters don't? What do they represent as far as whether it's thematic or a representation of some of those core themes that you are bringing forth in that story. In this story, he does that well. And so knowing what those are, and then as you're reading, starting to see how you can sort of begin to look at each one of them, even down to their training style, how they protect or push or encourage Vin.
Yeah.
And you can begin to sort of, even if you don't remember the name, you begin to associate that with the character.
Yeah, which I think is hugely important, again, when you're dealing with an ensemble cast, because what it does is it gives you multiple ways of remembering them.
Exactly.
It gives you sort of like multiple touch points and aspects of them that stick out to you of like, oh yeah, Dachshund is is Kelsier's right-hand man, right? Like, he's the guy who was there first, and you sort of get like, oh, he's maybe like one of his closest friends, because at least he was one of the first people that Kelsier picked up. And then Breeze is the one that kind of likes to toy with people's agency. And like Ham, right, is like, oh, he's the beefcake philosopher. And so it gives us like multiple, but to your point as well, because they each have a role in the heist, right? Okay, Breeze is our, oh no, I can't remember which medal it is. Oh, I'm gonna get my Brando Sando fan card revoked. Because I can't remember. Oh no. But Ham is the thug, right? He is he's the one who burns pewter. And so you're associating them with their role. You know, I'm going to remember it after we get off the recorded line. I'm going to be so mad at myself. I'm going to be like screaming it into the void. It's that's what this thing is.
Listen, and I'm no help because I will mess up all the medals because I don't even have a pretend card. Okay, listen.
But anyway, just to your point that like when you have a cast like that, getting multiple facet and multiple ways that a reader can experience them and remember them and like associate them with something helps keep them straight and allows you to kind of like keep anchored in the story and not get lost.
And the other part about this, which we talk about a lot later when I bring up about layering, it also helps when it comes to his world building and our association with the magic system. So that's the way sort of, go ahead.
He's a soother. I'm sorry. I was just like, I found it. I got it. He's a soother. Ah!
I was thinking emotions because I always know he's playing with their emotions. Yes. But I was not going to say it out loud. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, book. So, but to me, I think the biggest takeaway, and also the biggest thing that I think we can hang our information on as we move forward, is that each one of them serve multiple roles as far as, or come in multiple ways. And we know that about each one of the characters, whether it's, their skill set, what they contribute to the team, their teaching style. And it also teaches us about that particular element in that magic system, since then we find out is very unique in her application and ability when it comes to the magic, without us giving away a lot. And so it's like he takes each one of them and it's like a power pack punch.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And I mean, I know I probably experienced that before, but yeah. Okay. So with that said, I think now before we move into like any sort of like big carryaways towards the end, are there any other aspects that you want us to be able to consider? Because I want to say this, like, y'all, I'm telling y'all I'm running shotgun with Rachel on this, but I want to say, like, as someone who's read this book several times, not as much as Rachel, I think it was my third read, but you don't get all of this 1, 2, or 3. There were some things that I got this time that I was like, oh, like I feel so much better about Kelsier's relationship with Vin. And oh my gosh, says it. I didn't pay as much attention to him before, and I should have. And there were certain scenes that really rose to the top for me. And so I would say, if you find that as you read this book, that this is not just your jam, but something that you want to use as either a comp or to be able to walk through the process of looking at a trilogy, be prepared to read this several times.
Yes.
If you really want to get all of the goodness, because it's not going to come to you the first time. And even if you did try to force yourself to do it, I think you would get so much more if you read it a couple of times and then you go back.
Yeah.
And then begin to sort of digest what you are experiencing as you move through.
Yeah, for sure. Same rules apply. Everything that we say about any book is like, if there's a book you want to study, if you haven't read this book before, just enjoy the ride. This is a fantastic book. It's well plotted, great cast. Like, it's just a great experience. So, like, don't get ahead of yourself trying to be like, oh, I gotta, I'm trying to like pick apart all this stuff. Like, just enjoy it. You will be happier for it. And honestly, it's going to be harder to try to pull it apart when you don't know where it's going, especially because we've worked so hard to avoid spoilers. So anyway, so the same rules apply, right? It's like, okay, just enjoy it the first time as a reader and get the experience, because then you can go back when you have an experience. You can say, what caused me to have this experience? Why did I feel this way? And you look more closely at the book on that second read, that third read, that fourth read. Again, especially if you're looking to use it as a comp of some kind. Then you can really start to pick it apart, but pick it apart more meaningfully because you have the whole in mind, and you will see the story in layers because the story is full of layers as you kind of like peel back one, and then on another read you're like, oh, I didn't catch that, and then another, and it, so reading multiple times over, honestly, for Dana and I both, for any book that we studied, that's standard practice. We like read it the first time and we're like, ooh, this hit something, this is good, and then we take the time and we go back and we read it again, and then we read it again. Like, this is, so join the club is all I'm saying, is like we always are doing this, reading books multiple times over. One quick, go ahead.
And if you haven't really thought about it in this way, you may want to go back to our bonus episode in December when we talked about comps.
Yeah,
was that December or November?
That was the very end of November. So right at the end of the
November.
Twisted Love series, that fifth Sunday. And you can find it, by the way. So on YouTube, all of our books are organized into playlists now. And I have a separate playlist for all of our bonus episodes where we talk about ultra specific content. You can find it in the bonus episodes playlist, and it's all about comps.
Awesome. Okay, go ahead and go to your next point. I just was like, oh, that's when we talked about comps, but go ahead.
It's a little bit funny because I have to actually backtrack to one of the points you were making, and it was about the different characters and their specialties and how they teach us about the magic. Something that's super important about that I kind of want to highlight is the fact that Vin doesn't train with a specialist until like later. So the great thing is he doesn't use these specialists to explain to us how a certain aspect of the magic works, like for the first time. Instead, Kelsier kind of gives her like an overview of like, all right, here's the basics. And we're like, our heads are spinning, but we're like, okay. And then we see him start to train her. And so then we start to see how they work in action. And then we build up that understanding little by little throughout the story. And then by the time she's training with Breeze, now we're getting a deeper understanding of how it works, because we already have kind of acquired the surface understanding of like, okay, here's how the metals that push and pull on emotions, here's how they work. And then we get a deeper understanding when we train with the specialist. We see it with Ham, we see it with Breeze, and we see it with Marsh as well, where we've gotten introduced to, we already know the basics of how it works, and instead of, again, sending us through like a training, like a series of training scenes where it's like, okay, train with this person, then train with this person, then train with this person, and we learn about each metal for the first time in that sequence. But instead he spreads it out and he lets that breathe, so we get to see we get to see allomancy in motion, we get to see Vin using it and get a basic understanding, and then we get a specialist training, and then we go and we do some other stuff. Right? We don't get them all one after another. We do some other stuff, get a little bit more of an understanding and watch it in motion and see some more stuff happen. Then we get another training. And so the way that he paces that out as well, if you have a protagonist who's learning a skill and they're being trained, this is a really, really great one to look at, of like how we get to see them learning, like actively learning and actively doing stuff in the story, because we don't have the benefit of visual medium where we get to do a training montage. We don't have that. Which means you are using word real estate to demonstrate the training, but it also has to be interesting. And we don't necessarily just want to sit down and be like, now here's all the things. It's not like in a movie we'll tolerate a certain amount of it, But in books, right, we don't want scenes that are just for explaining a thing. And so you have to really curate that training very intentionally so that it's still moving the story forward, and we're still learning about the magic at the same time. And so your scenes, when you're world building, you really have to multitask. And then also you're looking to spread those scenes out, because we don't just want a dump of training, like scene after scene after scene, or one super long scene. And so you really have to be, if you're doing a story like that where you have a protagonist who's training or learning a skill, you really need to be cognizant of that, because we don't want to see a bunch of the same type of scene back to back to back, or a big ol' info dump, or like, again, one long training sequence. So just be mindful of that. And Brandon Sanderson does it really well in Mistborn, to help us understand the magic a little bit at a time and see it in motion. So I highly recommend this one for that particular skill as well.
Yeah, and it's really where you see him balancing her individual journey versus the overall external journey, right? Because what he's doing is sort of sandwiching it between what's going on when it comes to the crew's mission, and he's pulling her into those moments. So it sort of just felt like an off the cuff sort of recommendation, but it turns into a way to move both of those threads forward simultaneously, and also giving us an opportunity to see Vin in action. Why? Because at the end of the day, we got to be able to trust that Vin can do this thing.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening the entire time, right?
Yeah.
Because we see her using it originally as luck, and then evolving into who she is as a Mistborn.
For sure.
Okay, so with that said, as we sort of get ready to wrap up this overview, y'all, this conversation coming up over the next few episodes is probably a lot more, I feel like it's a lot more detailed, even though it's not, but it's going to be a little more, I just feel like this book packs a punch, and it's so much going on. And so we're trying to strip it down, but I guess I can just continue to say, read it several times, and you may want to listen to these episodes and then listen to the book again.
Yeah.
Because I think it's going to help you to see a little bit different, because what we're doing is almost shifting your lens a little bit of like, this is what we're experiencing while we're enjoying the story.
Yeah.
But are there any other things that sort of rise to the top that we want to make sure that we want to call out? I have one while I let you think, because I'm putting you on the spot, I know. I think the biggest thing to remember is that when we start off this story, we really are seeing who Vin is now. And who Vin is now, it is the lens that she experiences everything. And I think that happens in every single story that you will read, it, or at least it should be when you're talking about Act 1. But here, I love how he does it through her eyes, because she is such an observer. She would prefer to sit and watch. And so what we're doing is getting how she's processing what she sees. And so we're getting the difference between who she is now against who she can become.
Yeah.
And Kelsier sort of casts that vision early, and she's like, wait, what? And he's basically informing her of how powerful she really has the ability to become. And she already has the raw, like, DNA aspect of it, even if she doesn't know how to use it. And so understanding that every time she encounters another obstacle and challenge, it's that rub between who she is now and who she can be. And every time, whether she's encountering the crew, whether she's encountering a challenge, whether she's encountering herself, as she aims to be able to yield her abilities, it's that sort of rub for her, and it makes a lot of the other aspects a lot clearer as she's trying to figure out like who I am, what can I do, do I really want to be a part of this mission and this team, and not purely from a standpoint of survival, but as in being an actual contributor to this experience. And so it's a great journey. Are there any others that you want to point out as we get ready to close this episode?
Honestly, I just want to echo something that you've said over several of the coming episodes, is to remember that, so we're looking at, genuinely, I consider a masterwork, right? A masterwork of plotting and integration of internal and external and cast and world building. I mean, this book really does everything and does it well. And to realize that creating a work like this takes time. And I like talking about this in the overview because we're about to talk like crazy about like plot. Like it gets, in a lot of ways, it gets very technical. It's like, okay, we, core story thread and, reverse engineering and blah, 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 all these things of like techniques that you use to make a book like Mistborn. But realizing that before you go into this, first of all, remember that the book you read was not Brandon Sanderson's first or second or third or fourth at least draft. Because we talk about this later, and he talks about this in his lectures, but he wrote this story several times with different protagonists trying to find the right one. And so I know that he did at least 4 drafts. And so understanding that, and we'll talk about this throughout the episodes as well, is like depending on how your process is oriented, whether it's oriented very heavily toward planning, or if you have to do, if you do discovery drafting or any of those things, give yourself, know that a story like this takes time. And so if this is a comp for you, if this is a story, the type of story you aspire to write, give your story and give yourself the permission and the time to work the layers and to work the process, and to also, I think, know that I would generally advise, and this is something that Dana and I both will sort of say generally, if you want to work on the same story for the next 20 years, it is absolutely your prerogative to do so. No one's going to tell you that you can't. But also give yourself permission to grow into the writer that you want to be. Because I think that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be Brandon Sanderson out the gate. But guess what? Brandon Sanderson wasn't even Brandon Sanderson out the gate. Again, and these are, I pulled this stuff because I've been through his lectures, but he wrote, I think, 14 complete novels that he wrote all the way through and submitted to publishers, and was rejected before he was published for the first time. And again, I'm not saying you have to do that either, but the point being that, the reason he was able to write a book like Mistborn is because of all the experience that he had built over the course of his writing journey. And so don't ask yourself to be Brandon Sanderson out the gate, and certainly don't ask yourself to be Brandon Sanderson if you're still writing your first draft, okay? Remember that this isn't his first draft, it's his final draft that has been with editors, proofreaders, it's seen line editing, it's had all of the work done on it. Because this is a huge book and it's a huge undertaking, and so it's just, rather than getting demoralized over oh man, that's not, I'm not Brandon Sanderson, I'm not writing Mistborn, letting it, seeing the opportunity of the skills we have the opportunity to practice, and the kinds of stories we have the opportunity to learn how to tell, and giving yourself that space. And also, again, giving yourself that space to grow as a writer into the person who's telling the stories that you want to tell. And there's both aspects of that within the individual work and within your body of work as a whole, and not and taking those things into account as you're writing, and giving yourself that grace.
Yeah, and I think this is why, and this will be the last thing, unless you have anything else come up, I think this is why, for me, why I think giving yourself permission to write and publish, write and push play, because what you're going to find is that every book, every project, you're getting a little more comfortable with who you are as a storyteller. And it may be that you have your own version of a Mistborn, stewing in your back of your mind, right? That's stewing in the pit of your gut. And what you're allowing yourself to do is get closer and closer to the writer that has the chops to pull that off.
Yeah.
And every book, it may be, okay, what are we focusing on this book? We're focusing on characters. We're focusing on plot. We're focusing, like, and yes, you're going to do all the other things too.
Yeah.
But that may be the thing that you're really focusing on, the emotional or transformation or the internal transformation. And then when you stand back and you're ready to sort of dive in and you're like, okay, I'm ready to work on this trilogy and start really committing to creating and writing this trilogy, you now are equipped with a toolbox of tools that can support you, because this thing is going to require a new thing of you that you've never done before. And that's okay too. And so, but having this discussion across the next 4 episodes or the next additional 3 episodes are going to be some of the things that we think that this manuscript or this book does extremely well. And there's probably a million other things that we could add to it, but that I think that are quantifiable, that once you hear us say it, you can go back and see what we're talking about. Also that they are achievable, and that is not a way of us trying to be like him, but it's a structural thing that we can gain inspiration from. And you could find, other books that are not as entertaining to have to keep rereading.
Yeah, right.
You won't mind rereading this book at all. You would never say, dang it, I gotta read that book again. Right? You're not gonna hate that you have to reread this book again if that's the book that you want to utilize as something to help you with making that transition. And so with that said, y'all, this is our overview for Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. You will have us for 3 more episodes as we talk about plot next week. And we're going to be ready to dive in. And so if you have not done so already, visit us online at storydeepdive.com. You can see links to our previous episodes. You can also find out how to find out more information about Story Cipher with Rachel or Danger Tales with me, Dana. And we'll be back, a little bit yapping, a little bit laughing, a whole lot of booking in the next episode. And we will see you all really, really soon. Take care. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.